Ah, welcome to another exciting episode of the Dave and Pat Show, where we pick a topic, deep dive into it, and probably come back to it a million times because they're not, topics where it's just one and done. It's like, okay, we're going to deep dive into a big topic and see what it's all about. And so this week, or this day, or today, very excited, which to me sounds ironic. I'm very excited to be talking about Stoicism. Excited about Stoicism. So
we could start there with that misconception, but go on.
Yes. Oh, I don't know. I think I mix up being stoic with stoicism. And so I don't know what is stoicism?
So here we go. We're off to the races. So I think the first thing you've got to say is like, I almost wish, I almost think the way to talk about this is to call it something else, introduce it and explain it all, what it is and what it's about. And then after someone has a clear idea of what you're talking about, then you can say, oh, by the way, that's actually Stoicism.
Oh, I
because
see.
So first thing to say is that like notions people have in their heads about what it is to be stoic or stoicism, and like the modern meaning of the word is misleading at best. So the best thing to do is just to throw out all your preconceptions and what you think you know about it, because like it's maybe it's you might charitably call it a grotesque caricature. Because so what we're talking about is ancient Stoicism, and so that's the first thing to clarify is like the ancient Greek philosophy of Stoicism that was popular in ancient Greece and Rome from about 300 BC to about 200 AD. 500 years of being a real living philosophy in the ancient world. So that's the first misconception to get out of the way, is we're talking about that ancient philosophy, which happens to have that name. We'll get into what it really is and how modern notions of what it is to be stoic are just misleading.
So like even a Christian from 500 years ago and a Christian today would barely even recognize each other. So it's just
well, I don't know.
Maybe not even putting it into the context of religion. That's probably its own topic.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say with this. Well, yeah, but those are both people adhering to a belief system. Blah blah blah. Like the modern sense of the word is not a philosophy at all. Yes. It's just like a kind of a slight sort of attitude or stance or a response or lack thereof to things. I mean that's not like the actual ancient philosophy is this entire, I mean, we could, this is why I think you were talking about we're going to do more than one on it, because that, like, to actually cover just the content of the ancient philosophy, never mind sort of the modern expansion of it, that I think is what is more interesting about it, would just take, I don't know, hours and hours and hours.
Oh, you're right. Okay,
so let's world.
So like so what are we talking about then? I mean, that's really the question. It's like what is the modern useful, this is something that is a piece of your life, Stoicism?
Well, first let's answer that about like what is Stoicism, what would it be in your modern life? But I also want to clarify that like what I really want to talk about is not so much about like let's just get into Stoicism and learn about it and follow it and adopt it. Like what's really interesting to me is like, okay, that is one part of several ingredients to kind of a framework for starting to build a modern wisdom tradition, a modern wisdom practice, something like I there's a lot of it's a great foundation for building something new, and that's really what I'm interested in. But let's talk about what that foundation is. So
what is it?
I mean, so I think maybe the best way to there's a lot to it, but the best way to summarize what Stoicism kind of is like a stance towards your own moment to moment subjective experience that keeps you right on the edge of experience without getting pulled away and distracted into unproductive tangents, right? Like it's, and I think this is part, like it's basically like in the practical psychology side of it, which
Hmm.
it's primarily kind of a practical psychology, um, or practical philosophy in that way. Like it's all about not suffering needlessly. It's actually
Okay.
very similar to Buddhism in this way, and like a lot of people who are kind of who are interested in Stoicism now are interested in Stoicism and Buddhism,
Okay.
um, because they are so compatible and are in a lot of ways kind of getting at the same problem. But where Buddhism is trying to like dig deep into some sort of like fundamental root of suffering and alleviate that,
Yeah.
Stoicism is like this like tool set, this sort of like, you know, Swiss Army knife of tricks to um, basically keep you from getting in your own way,
To,
right? Like or to get tangled up in like the needless suffering that can happen when you fall into some psychological sand trap, as it were, right?
got it. Okay.
And Stoicism very accurately identifies those things and gives you practices and mental tricks to get you out of those things. And I think this is a lot of the reason why it's become popular among the kind of Silicon Valley, you know,
Yeah.
entrepreneur, alpha personality type, success oriented, you know, self-help kind of set. And it has, it's kind of a very popular thing, Stoicism in particular, you know, 8 Stoic teachings to maximize your,
ROI.
you know, but that's part of why it has become popular. And I think it's a great thing. I don't mean to minimize that. Like, sure, if you can, you know, learn some mental tricks to like keep you keep yourself from suffering needlessly and be more engaged and more effective, then great, right? I'm not knocking that, but I think that's why part of why it's become so popular, in that kind of set, like the Tim Ferriss type.
Yeah.
Ferriss has made a big career out of talking about this kind of like aspect of Stoicism, um, and it's great for that. Um, but if you think about it, like the if you can avoid this, you know, getting all wound up over something that happened, or
Yeah.
um, just, you know, ruminating and kicking yourself or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, when you're in that mode of thinking, you're pulled away from whatever's happening now. You're
Yes.
not paying attention,
Totally.
right? You are just you know, just running
Yep.
something over in your head over and over again, right? Like it takes you away from what's continuing to happen. The world continues to unfold,
A
but you're no
path.
longer
Yeah.
a
A,
participant. You're
a
sitting there.
past. A past that you cannot change, and a future
Right,
that you can't even predict.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so that's, you know, and Stoicism is extremely lucid at identifying some of the ways that happens and just spelling it out, like here's how to look at it instead, and here's how not to fall into that trap, to the point where like it's there's a modern therapy school called cognitive behavioral therapy that was inspired by Stoicism,
Oh.
and it's the most successful form of therapy. I mean, in terms of the evidence-based therapies, like the one that has been shown to work, unlike, you know, Fortean, you know, dream analysis or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you know, the kind of stuff that you could do for your whole life and maybe you've made incremental progress. Like the thing that actually works to kind of to free people from their unproductive ways of being is cognitive behavioral therapy, which
Hmm.
is largely inspired by Stoicism. So um, I that's the first bit, right? Is that like if you can not suffer needlessly, you can be more engaged with things,
Yeah.
staying in kind of staying right on the edge of what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, but also this notion that like it means that you're like an unfeeling, joyless, you know, person. It's like, well, just take a lot of all the pointless suffering away, and I mean, if anything, that's going to free you up a lot, right? So um, and they actually make an active effort out of um, fostering a deep appreciation of things or deep gratitude through like prepare like imagining things going wrong, basically. So we can get into some of these things, but um yeah, that's like, it's this very kind of existential staying with your life as it's happening, and having this sort of grace and adeptness in just riding the bronco, so to speak,
Is so I mean, one of the things that I um so there's a difference between like being in the moment and also taking steps for a positive future.
Mhm.
And so do you see that those things can, and learning from our past, right? Like, okay, hey, it hurts when I do that. Let's not do that. You talked about these stories that just keep on getting rewound and played, and you just get wrapped up in these sand these sand traps. It does, and that stoicism brings a tool set forward. Does stoicism also dive into, where does this come from? Like, what is this? Like, where does this world of like these sand traps that we create, the cages that we create in our own making, where do they come from?
That's I I don't know if I'm familiar with any particular explanations for it, except for them that they are very very accepting of the nature of things.
Okay.
And that's part of how they don't get into these sand traps, right? Is to um I mean, there's one of the major distinctions that they make is between the things that are under your control and the things that are not under your control.
Yeah.
Um, and some of the things that are not under your control aren't just external things per se. They're things that arise in your own nature, sort of spontaneously, and before you have any chance to do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
You stub your toe, you get angry, right? That's happened before. You're already angry. You're already like, like that reaction's already happened before you've had a chance to, have a moment to decide how you then want, like your second response is kind of where they place their emphasis. That
Mm,
these things can arise, and they don't even like advocate for trying to keep them from arising or to deny or suppress them, or like there's a real profound acceptance of the unfolding of the world, which includes yourself.
yeah.
um and that is, this all this is arising, and you're just kind of rolling with that much, right? But then, having arisen, what then do you do about it, right? How then do you choose to frame it and respond once you have some conscious ability to respond? And I think that's just a like it's a very eminently like sane and almost like existential sort of like take on like, here's how your existence unfolds. And
Mm,
if you can understand and don't, like, there's no point in fighting and begrudging the way things that are just going to arise do arise, and focus on where you have your pivot points, where you have your ability to um, perceive and to act in response to that, and put all of your care and concern there. And then frankly, even what comes of that is something that you again take as like just the way the world unfolds, right? Like you might take some action hoping that have a certain outcome, and then whatever, the world intervenes, something different happens, but a bit different off of your intention. But it's, the most common thing to get bent out of shape about things not turning out the way you wanted them to.
yeah.
um like part of like a true stoic mentality is to let that shit go immediately. Like as soon as it's something happens differently than you thought, you accept
Yeah.
it, boom, on the spot, and
Right.
that is your new reality that you are now choosing how to respond to, right? So
Hmm.
it's like this very real time way of processing things. Not to say that you can't like have foresight or anything like that, but just or take some lessons out of something. You might say, note to self,
Yeah.
but that only takes a second, right? You don't have to like spend all day, you know, being upset about how things went to draw that lesson, right? Um, so
But
that
feelings happen, right? Like
yeah,
feelings do happen. I mean, stoicism isn't about like the absence of feelings. This isn't some sort of Star Trek Vulcan Spock thing.
no,
Feelings happen.
no, yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
this gets into the misconception again,
Right.
and frankly, again, why like sometimes I feel like we should call it something else just so that
Yeah.
we don't, so that people don't spend half their time, walking back from the misconceptions they started from, is like is not like they're very much about positive emotions, yes, absolutely, and even fostering and cultivating them very deliberately. Um, but it's where the stereotype comes from, or stereotype, where the caricature comes from,
Mhm.
is like people who don't get upset over things that everyone else would get upset over, right? And so like, oh, they're unfeeling or whatever, and it's like, no, they're just not getting
Yeah.
letting themselves get wound up over shit that's
Right.
useless to get wound up over. Um, and so
Right. Like, why are you getting wound up about something you cannot control?
yeah, you can't control, or it's already
Yeah.
done. It's
Yeah.
and like it's so yes, very much about and they really and if you get into the once you really delve into the philosophy, they really have this vision of this beautiful way of living that's like putting a emphasis on I mean virtue in the sense of living with excellence towards what you value, right? Not
Mhm.
virtue in that like Victorian prudish,
Yeah.
keep your pants zipped sort of virtue, not like virtue in the ancient sense, which was much more about like to live virtuously was to live sort of like beautifully and because you are excellently pursuing the values that are important to you, right? And I think we can all recognize that when
Okay.
somebody is
Yeah.
like, Mahatma Gandhi lived a beautiful life because
Yeah.
he lived excellently in pursuit of values that mattered to him, right? That is um, what they have this vision of like this way of living life beautifully, and that's the entire um, objective of what they're doing, right? Like that's what their philosophy is about, is like avoid the folly that leads you into all of these obvious um, you know degenerate and unfortunate sort of mistakes in life, and put the right things first,
And
and
it's also not, just do whatever feels best to you.
no,
Yeah.
no, it's very much like in fact the one of the virtues that they spell out is like is temperance, moderation. It's like the ability to not just pursue immediate sensory pleasure,
Mhm.
um having some control over that. So it's anyway, we can go on and on. It's hard to summarize the entire thing, but
Mhm.
um suffice it to say, someone who's doing a good job of living by Stoic philosophy is probably the happiest person you know, right? And probably also the most effective, you know. And so, yeah, the caricatures, just need to die because it's
What
not at all.
what started you down this path?
Um, yeah, interesting question. This in a way, I've made a study of this over the last 10 months or so. I
Mhm.
stumbled into it through a podcast that I listened to,
Mhm.
um, with Robertson, sorry, Donald Robertson, like talking, who's one of the kind of really great authors around Stoicism. Um, but part of why it really caught me wasn't just like it was the third of three pieces that I had been sort of gathering along the way.
Mhm.
And so once it clicked, I was like, oh, okay, now this is something. Um, in a way, this all started for me like in college.
Mhm.
Um, I had a very extensive science education in college, like in my indecisive college career. I ended up, for better or for worse, studying a wider range of sciences than anyone probably should. Um, and out of one thing I got out of that though was like this sort of view of what all if you take all the scientific knowledge of all these different things, right? Like I mean, I did physical therapy for a while, so I
Yeah.
learned biology and anatomy and neuroanatomy and all that kind of stuff. I did environmental science for a while, so I learned all about the earth and those cycles, and um, I did physics. I did I I kind of could put the whole picture together. I know a fair amount of quantum mechanics and all that. Um, and to me, like part of what I, as much as I didn't end up completing the physical therapy degree, you know, it's one thing to be interested in the subject matter. It's another thing to want to be a nurse type person as
Yeah.
a career. So, um, just not my own temperament. Um, and but I was so grateful for having done that schooling, just for how much that really crystallized to me, like the absolute gobsmacking wonder and rapture that is some sort of a actual full appreciation of what you are and what it is going on that makes you alive, right?
Mm.
um, and how just absolutely interconnected you are with like the whole of everything.
Mm.
Like the fact that is not new age, like woo woo sort of like
Yeah.
I believe it because I want to believe it. Like that is a literal that is a factual description of our best version of scientific knowledge of the world, right? And that just I've never been able to put that down. Like that like ever since that really kind of hit me. Like I was like, everyone should understand this. This is like
Mm.
absolutely life changing. Like that people don't know what they are, I think is like probably the greatest, uh tragedy of modern life. Like I mean, 200 years ago,
Yeah.
nobody knew. And so that's fine. Because we didn't have the capacity, no, like the knowledge wasn't there.
Yeah.
So that was just no choice. The fact that now we have all this knowledge, we know what we are, but almost nobody knows that about themselves. And even
Mm.
people who've kind of have taken some science in school probably were encouraged to really internalize it in that way of like, great, you know the concepts, you could recite some things about cells and atoms or whatever, but like it's another thing to like take it past concepts and to really see the whole thing together. Um, so ever since college, I've kind of carried this with me. I couldn't put it down. Of like, this is
The building
profound in
blocks
all
is
the ways
yeah.
that you want that like it's absolutely moving.
Mm.
But it wasn't enough by itself, right? Like you can't just get all like boggled all the time and just be like, ooh, oh my god, wow, universe. Um, so it wasn't enough by itself. The second piece of the puzzle came from like mindfulness meditation,
Mm.
which I started doing habitually, what, like about a year and a half ago.
Mm.
Um, and it was clear to me, and like I got into it through in the right kind, like what for me was the right entrance, the right kind of like segue into it, which was through Sam Harris's like books and meditation app,
Yeah.
because he takes a very like secular scientific kind of angle towards it, right?
Mm.
Like neuroscientist um, and the subjective side of things, right? The first person experience was the bit that sort of third person scientific knowledge was missing. It's like you can talk all you want about like what the universe is
Yeah.
or what you are objectively, but people don't have direct access to that. They can only know that through extensive and tedious learning. And a lot of creative imagination, right? Like that's not a thing you can perceive directly.
Yeah.
But what you can don't what you can and have no choice but to perceive directly is your first person experience, and that is what's real to people in their own experience, right?
I see.
And that's the side that like mindfulness meditation gets to, and meditation in general is sort of like just witness your experience and just that's it.
Who's
That's
doing
what,
the
like,
doing? Yeah.
yeah, who's doing that, like this very like humble watching yourself happen kind of thing, um, from the first person perspective. So I came across that, and like really that hit me like a ton of bricks also, where it's like that's the other side of the coin,
Mm.
right? There's the third person view, which I wish people knew more of, because it's, I think, very inspiring. Um, but you've got to have that first person view also. It's got to speak to people's direct, tangible experience, their subjective experience. Um, but that too was like missing something. So anyway, so
Mm-hmm.
when I came across stoicism, like that was sort of like the missing piece that glues it all together and makes it all work.
This is what I'm hearing, and see
Yeah.
if this is what it needs. So like there's the world of science of human, right? Like
Mhm.
the biological, the physics, the temporal, the the everything that we can describe of down to the subatomic, all the way through how we create our own gravity, and all of that. So uh, there's the scientific explanation of the human experience in the world that we live in and the universe that it occupies. And then there's the how we perceive that. So there's the objective, like this is what it is. Then there's like the perception of it, the first person perception of it, and
Mhm.
how we are um, experiencing it. And that is has a very very like who has your now, and observing who your now is very much in a sort of a Buddhist mentality. And then there is Stoicism, which neither of those two things answer or even approach. Okay, how do you act? Okay, now that you know what what's like now that you know all the building blocks and all of the science around it, now you can actually see it and perceive it rather than the world just happening to you. You can actually perceive it. What do you do now? That's
Yeah.
what I'm hearing, that those are
Yeah.
sort of the three-legged stool.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And not just that, like, and in addition to that, not only does stoicism add sort of like the and then how do you act sort of thing, which
Yeah.
we've only just scratched the surface of even that part of it. There's more to this sort of how to act part. Um, but like without having to glue these things together artificially,
Yeah.
part of why it was the glue to put them together is that like stoicism already, and even in its own time, um, very much had these elements already in it,
Mm.
right? Um, and they had their own versions of it that they could contemplate at the time. And part of what I think is really interesting, their own versions of this sort of scientific view of the life, the universe, and everything that we have now, um, and this meditative, contemplative, take your pick,
Contemplative, yes.
uh, sort of approach towards first person experience, like all of that was more or less a part of like stoicism and how its framework works to begin with.
Mm.
And so it's kind of like, they already kind of took these as like the elements that were important to put together a coherent way of living, and they did it in the way they could at the time, which is already, I mean, so impressive.
Mm.
In some ways, it's almost depressing to read some old Stoic writing, because it's sort of like, holy shit, they had like almost everything figured out 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Like we've made so little progress in some ways, but I'm interested in us making progress now, because like um so on the like the scientific worldview, so they had like their three pillars, their three-legged stool that they had in their philosophy was physics, ethics, and logic, right? So physics they've took to mean, I mean, what we would just call physical sciences more broadly, like not just physics but like all of it, right? Biology and
Mm.
cosmology and the whole shebang. um uh Ethics was like obviously some of the stuff we've already been talking about, but like they how to behave in the world um was also not just like some of these practical psychology sort of tricks we're talking about, but like a real sort of principled way. This virtue ethics that we were starting to talk about was like making the very important distinction that like it makes sense to pursue desirable things and avoid undesirable things, but they draw the hard line that you never at the expense of your personal virtue, right? Which I
Okay.
think, which that's their sort of guideline. It's sort of like, sure, pursue money, that's fine, of course, it makes sense
Yeah.
to want these things, um, but not like those things all operate at a tier below virtue, and nothing can ever be traded for your personal virtue. Which, I mean, shit, how much better would the world be if like if everybody operated on that standard? And I mean, we'd have no spam. There'd be no spam. right? Like,
Because no one would be, it would violate your personal virtue to send out spam.
yeah, your dignity or your virtue is sort of like, yeah, maybe I can make money doing that, but I'm not going to cross that line, you know. Um, and then logic was their third sort of stool, leg of the stool, and like, which I find interesting also. As part of what's compelling to me is like, um, they had their own, like, you know, generally like critical thinking. They had some of the best, the most developed like formal logic of the time.
Mm.
But if you kind of take that more broadly, looking at it now, like critical thinking, scientific reasoning, statistical reasoning, you know, fallacies, cognitive biases, like all of this ability, like how to think well, how to like
Mm.
not be deceived, how to
Yeah.
not fall into those sand traps, right?
Yeah.
Where like you can be, you know, confirmation bias and whatever else, right? Like they considered it one of the three main pillars of their entire philosophy to bother to take the time to learn to think effectively and draw accurate conclusions without falling, you know, to do so reliably. It's
Oof.
like, well, okay, that would be good.
Boy, that would be really
Um,
good. Boy,
yeah,
we could use a giant injection of that right now.
yeah, yes, exactly.
Hmm.
So yeah, like I say, there's a lot to it, and I'm sure I'm talking too fast but like, so to tell the
Well,
story, go back
okay?
to the
So
story.
what's it meant for you? How about that? Because you like I hear your exploration of this. It's like, okay, here's another piece, and this is glues it together. And you know, what was it, like? Who was Pat before Stoicism, and who is Pat now in
Mm,
Stoicism?
excellent question. Um, for one, Pat now has been sucked into this to the point where like the more I started looking at the kind of connections among these things,
Mm-hmm.
and ever I turned, and all these, like I kept seeing people talking about things that got to the same kinds of points, right? Like a lot of the podcasts I listened to and all this stuff, like and this that, like things fit in a way where I was like, okay, I have to keep pulling this thread,
Yeah.
right? Like it's sort of, it's almost like, you know, things that this happens occasionally in people's lives where like, I mean, it's almost like falling in love, where like something just like comes and grabs you and pulls you in, and sort of like
Mm-hmm.
you have to follow this, you have to like you have to pursue this for a while, like this is not a thing you can walk away from.
Yeah.
um so that's one thing, is I just had to, like, I feel like, all right, this is now a side project of mine to make a study of this, because there's something here, and I might as I got, you know, I can't just leave this. um but a tangible example is, I used to be a lot more actively upset, moment to moment, large fractions of my day, about national politics. Uh,
Yes.
as I think a lot of people would definitely would
Sure. Yeah.
empathize with. I and it's not that I don't care about those things anymore, um, but I'm on a better footing about like, um, not suffering needlessly about it.
Mm.
Right? Like there's not a martyrdom to just being unhappy about it. Like that doesn't make you a good person
Yeah.
by itself. It's like, okay, is there anything you are doing, to do anything to try to affect change in this situation?
Right.
And just being upset about it can feel really satisfying in a weird sort of like
Mm.
masochistic kind of a way, where it's like, I'm such a good person because I'm suffering so much. It's like, yeah, but you're not doing shit, are you? Um, and so like there's a sense of false engagement that can come from that,
Yeah.
which, uh, when you when you break that habit of just ruminating and
Mm-hmm.
stewing and simmering over this, you realize you've just been ruminating and stewing and simmering, and nothing outward to come from it. So like, um, it's worth mentioning that like it's really is kind of a philosophy of action in that way, where it's like,
Mm.
you know, the acceptance is not to say like accept it and then do nothing.
Yeah. What are you
It's
going
just
to do
sort of
about
like,
it?
it's
Yeah.
like take it as the landscape that you're on,
Yeah.
and act because you are an actor, right?
Mm-hmm.
um so there's this really beautiful metaphor that they use of like the archer trying to hit a, you know, a bison or whatever, and you know, it I think it captures both the need to act and act with as much skill as you can muster, with the acceptance of what you can't control. Because the metaphor is that like you aim as well as you can,
Hmm.
but once you release the bow, it may or may not hit the bison. The bison might turn, the wind might blow, things
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
These things are out of your control. And so they try to practice this sort of like detachment from the outcomes of their actions in that way, where it's like when it's once it's out of your control, like that's the world at large. And you um but there is this action to it, right? There is this sort of like mustering your best effort and getting as close as you can to the target. It's not just saying like,
Mm.
well, fuck it, whatever. The bison's over there, I'm over here. That's the way the world is. It's like, no, I want to get that bison. I'm going to take a shot at it, and I may or may not hit it. Right?
Let's talk about control.
Yeah.
So what does to a stoic, I mean, like what does control mean? In that, like I can only speak for mine. Like I from my world, I know that the more stressed I get about something or someone, the more I try to control the situation, right? And that ends up creating its own chaos.
Yeah.
And absolutely the absolute opposite of what I really want, which is freedom. And that freedom aspect of what I want isn't about controlling a situation, even though when I get stressed, I want to actually narrow it and get it into a box and even get people to just do what I want
Mm-hmm.
and everybody will be happy. And that's exactly the opposite of what reality is, right? Like
Yeah.
the reality is that you want people to do what they do and to have like love and joy and presence as a part of that. So
Yeah.
what for and for me it's observing when I'm controlling, but also not leaving everything up to just almost random chance. It would be like the example might for me would be like is say just making plans with someone almost controlling. um so like I'm trying to get an idea of like where does planning and a look to the future end, and control begin, or what does control mean for a stoic?
Yeah. I mean, this is a thing that they really focus on, is like being really clear about the things over which you have control. Um, and that's, your own perceptions, your own like interpretations of things,
Hmm.
which is an important thing to come back to. Um, and your own actions. And so like, and in your actions you can try to influence things, and sure, and you should try. But like, yeah, they are very clear about like making this distinction between like how you might imagine things to be, or how you would like want things to turn out, and really not grasping on the actual outcomes of things.
Mm.
And that's a really hard thing for people to do, I think. And I think especially in modern times where everyone is very much like there is so much. I don't know. In some ways, I wonder if modern times make it harder, because we have a greater ability to exert control over our environments than people used to, right? Like a long time ago, I mean, shit, like most things were out of your control in a way that, like, you know, you know, you've got uh, you've got remote control colored lights that respond to your voice, right? Like our ability to exert control
It's
over our.
crazy, to
I'll
your
resist the
environment.
urge to like change your lighting color for you right now. But um, like our ability to exert control over our environment is more than it used to be, right? And so maybe in some ways it was almost easier for them to accept that then. Um, but it's sort of like, we have incrementally more control now over our environments, but it's only incremental, and the limitations still exist. So like um, that if there is a sort of central kind of stoic attitude, it is that like um, detachment from the outcomes of things. I mean, even to the
So
point of like sickness and death. And so it's like, and that's a pretty profound way of accepting the unfolding of things. Like, you know, that they would take it that far to say that like, health is preferable, but you know, if sickness happens, that's not even a thing to be upset about,
Hmm.
right? Like, and that's a hard thing. That takes more sort of, it takes some effort to get there. Um, which brings me to another thing I want to mention.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what I find so compelling about this is that like it's not just a set of beliefs to have. And I think this to me is like a crucial aspect of anything that sort of is going to be a viable way for people to improve, to live better,
Yeah.
is that it is focused around practices. It's a practice. There are some beliefs and there's some philosophical framework and there's some things to learn, there's some teachings, da da da. But it's very much about like having built up that background on some things you learn or whatever. It's a practice. It's like there are things you do each day to train yourself to perceive in certain ways, to change habits of thought, um, to cultivate and foster certain larger perspectives on things. Like it's a practice, and like I personally like the only thing that is like something that's not a practice. I don't think even makes sense. Given how much our minds and bodies are these dynamic things that respond to what we do with them, right? Like use it or lose it is not just an aphorism, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
your body and your brain and all of this and your cognition, like you are shaped by what you do every day
Mm-hmm.
in a way that you're slowly molding yourself all the time, and that's just you know if you don't believe me, go look at the science, like right.
Right.
uh, and so I think anything that really is dealing with things as they are has to work in that way, right? Has to be a practice, has to, it's not just good enough to sit there and have certain pious beliefs. Like that doesn't do it, right? Like you've got to be cultivating this in yourself through actions every day.
So what is a stoic practice? What's an example?
um a good example that like there's a bunch. This is sort of like their wheelhouse. They've got like a whole set
Yeah.
of these things,
Or
right?
for you, what would be a common thing that
um
you find valuable in your life?
One that really like resonated with me when I first encountered it was this view from above.
Hmm.
um Something they do is like imagining, like just it's a practice they do, spend 5-10 minutes just imagining as if you were observing yourself from 10,000 feet
Hmm.
and just see your life from that vantage point. That I think is a cool exercise by itself. That really hit me as like a place where you could do this sort of view from the cosmos type thing that
Yeah.
I like to do, from based on like having an education in sort of the science of all these things, sort of like look at your life as not separate or different from this entire bio astro like um the continuous universe thing that you are, right? Like a way of viewing yourself from this other perspective.
Hmm.
um they also do something very similar to the Tibetan Buddhists with like contemplating your own death, basically.
Mhm.
um and they spend time on this of like imagining your death and imagining yourself dying, and like Americans hate this because we don't like to think about death. Oh, that's macabre. Ooh.
Yeah.
But like, and they, in the same way that the Tibetans do, they don't see this as a way of being macabre or morose or it's quite the opposite. It's like, a, you should not be in denial about this.
Yeah. Don't be denial to the inevitable.
You need to be really comfortable with like
Yeah.
this is the situation you're in.
Yeah.
um, but also like it's meant to foster a really deep gratitude and appreciation, right? Like if you just coast along thinking this is always going to keep coasting along,
Yeah.
right? So um, short of that, they also make a practice of imagining things going wrong,
Mm.
imagining lesser sort of like bad quote unquote things happening to you, um, partially to sort of like uh, prepare yourself to respond well if and when some bad things do happen to you, um, but also to make you appreciate how much those things aren't happening to you. um, like imagining your a loved one dying or whatever, or a loved one coming to harm, or losing your home, or losing your
Yeah.
job, or whatever. Like imagine these things transpiring to you. Like if you want to feel gratitude,
Right.
like think about these sorts of things.
Well, I'd also think about it in the sense of like, if I couldn't think of anything that was going to go wrong with something I was going to do, is it even worth doing? Is it big enough? Is it meaningful enough? Like, if it's so insignificant in what I'm doing, or I have so little control in it that I can't even imagine something going wrong with it, it's kind of a so what, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And so they also make a practice of like, aside from imagining things generally going wrong,
Yeah.
they have a practice of like when you set out to go do something, taking a moment to imagine something intervening so that so that you don't achieve it, right?
Mm.
And this all sounds very negative, and people can be like, "Oh, they're such downers," and that's not the point. It's like, I mean, it's part of how you don't get wrapped up in a knot when something does go wrong. Like how often you're driving somewhere and the traffic is worse than you thought it was going to be, and you get pissed off that the traffic is bad.
Yeah.
Now, we live in San Francisco.
Yeah.
If you drive around San Francisco very much and you're still getting upset about bad traffic, you are ceasing. You're failing to learn, right? Like the traffic is going to be bad.
Yeah.
If you get upset about it every single time, how
Yeah.
silly is that? And so
Right.
like they make a one of their practices is to like they call it like fate willing more or less, or is it at the outset of something you just put in that sort of like thought to yourself of like, this is what I think I'm going to achieve and go do,
Yeah.
but more or less like acknowledging that shit could happen when, and if and when it does, don't get bent out of shape over it,
Mm.
right? And part of the point of that is that like, not just to be like fatalistic about things, but like once you get bent out of shape, you're not processing things in real time anymore,
Mm.
right? Like if you can just be like, okay, shit, that happened. Now what? Like there's this uh one of the authors that's become fairly famous writing about stoicism is Ryan Holiday. He wrote a book called the obstacle is the way, and like that's a general uh one of the little like aphorisms that Stoics like to bounce around is that like any obstacle, anything that comes up is seen as like, you know, the new terrain basically. Like, you know, like newsflash, things are different than you thought they were going to be. You need to pivot. And like to me, there's a real beautiful sort of like almost like existential grace about that, where
Mm.
you don't cling to your old notions of what was going to transpire at all, right? When something different is happening, you update your game plan as it happens. And so and like that's a thing that, and part of how you're able to do that is to acknowledge, to be prepared for that sort of thing to happen, and to and a notice when your thoughts start to go towards the this shouldn't be happening kind of
So,
train of
uh,
thought.
what I'm hearing is look, like we're saying that emotions, we're human, right? So emotions are going to happen, right? We
Yeah.
have a prefrontal cortex. We have, like, emotions going to be there, right? Um, and um, what I'm also hearing is, um, have those emotions. You're going to have them. You're supposed to have them because you are human. Now the question is what are you going to do with it, right? If you are blown out of the water so that you are so irrational and unable to actually like make the react well and change, then you're stuck. You're nowhere. And this is exactly where you don't want to be. But
Yeah.
if you have that same big emotion, no matter what it is, and you know what exactly is that is going to be next, then you're good. And I'm saying that I'm hearing that that's the difference is, you can be completely unpeeled about something and be stuck,
Yeah.
or you can be unpeeled about something and moving.
Yeah. And you can be unpeeled momentarily, um, because there, and it's important again to distinguish between like the automatic emotion and an automatic reaction that happens sort of like before, you know, it's happened by the time you're aware of it. And then there's the feeding,
Mm. Right.
the coal
Right.
shoveling that you then do, right? Like, because most people will then like having, you know, perceived some transgression or some affront to their to their person will then spend the next, I don't know, hours, days, weeks, just shoveling coal on that fire of like just telling themselves how pissed they are about that and how much that should not have happened. That person should not have done that to them. And they're just, and that's the ruminating, right? That's um, the spinning on it. And like that's a big part of what Stoics said you've got to like own is your own sort of your own interpretations and your own perceptions of things. And so
So you create your own reality, is what I just heard.
yeah, well,
And how you perceive it and how, your assumptions about it are up to you.
yeah. And so that the phrase that they use for this is like that it's not things that hurt you, it's your opinions about things. Or, and like or something to that effect.
Yeah, yeah.
And like and that can sound a little bit like flippant and dismissive, but like opinions is meant to take a little more like, your perception, right? So a big part of what Stoics try to do is to that's why they have these perspective broadening exercises that they do, is to not see things in such a myopic, I'm special sort of way, but to try to interpret things that happen to you in the way you would if it was happening to somebody anywhere, right? Like there's a bigger picture of these things that like would give you less cause for dismay than you tend to have when it's you that is happening to.
Yeah.
But also like there's assumption, all kinds of, and I love this aspect of it too. Is it like it like I don't know. I think there's a strain in modern culture that like speak your truth or perception is reality and blah blah blah, and it's like that basically never asks people to ever own their interpretations of things. Like that you interpreted something a certain way isn't right or true. Like it is true that that is the experience you just had. That's true in some objective sense, right? That happened. But I love that the Stoics actually like challenge people and challenge themselves to broaden their perspective and to take and to own their interpretation and to have some detachment from their interpretation. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in. This is exactly why it's effective as a psychotherapy, is that what they do, a lot of what they do in cognitive behavioral therapy is train people to have some cognitive distance from their interpretation of events and to describe things more objectively and more dispassionately.
Yeah.
As a way of broadening their perspective, basically, because the way people tend to like, something happens to you, you're like, oh, this is the end of the world, or this is awful, like people use this evocative language with themselves in their self-talk and what they're saying to themselves. And it's like, well, what, like if you were to calm down and describe it, from a bigger perspective, you might say, life goes on. And that is a surprisingly effective thing to do. I mean, it sounds, a lot of these things sound obvious and kind of simple, which is great, because if it was some super, law of attraction type mystery, then they're making shit up, right? Like,
yeah.
It is stuff you've probably heard before. A lot of it is, because it is getting to the experience people actually have. And so, of course,
wisdom keeps on getting repeated.
Yes, exactly. So, good thing, other people have noticed these same things, but like they make a whole system out of it. And it's, I mean, it's very, they struck on a lot of very true things about how the human mind works. So
what's the most modern aspect of this? Because we know this has ancient traditions. We know that there's a lot of like current celebrity focus on it.
Yes.
But what would you say is really sort of the most modern take on it for Stoicism?
And this gets to my like real interest in it, because a lot of what you'll find, and I'm sure some people have maybe seen some of this kind of stuff about Stoicism online and whatnot, about ways to live better. A lot of that stuff is basically making a thing of looking back to the ancient Greeks as if like we have to reference, Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or one of these, ancient people, um, in order to have some sort of like, leg to stand on, right? Like we've got to look back. Um, I What's really interesting to me is there's a lot of activity around like modern stoicism is like neo stoicism, modern stoicism, um, basically kind of adapting it to modern times and like carrying the tradition forward. Um, and this is a really important point. Part of what's really compelling to me about it, aside from the actual content of it and the
Hmm.
teachings of it, um, is the kind of practice that it was in its own time and what that says about how we could carry it forward into the present and make a modern thing out of it. Because in its own time, over the 500 years that it was kind of alive in Greece and Rome, it was an evolving thing, right? It was like it was a school of philosophy. It was open. Everything was open for debate. It
Hmm.
was like nothing was just sort of like, here, believe this.
Yeah.
No, it was like, here's what we have to say. Don't believe us. Convince yourself.
Mm.
Look at it. If it's true, it's true for you too. You know, um, and it was like this living, evolving thing. Like the beliefs actually did evolve over the 500 years that it was popular, and I think that's such a great precedent for like taking it
Mm.
forward. It's sort of like I am not a joiner type. I don't like
Yeah.
anything that involves like this is the things to believe and
Hmm.
and whatever. I'm much more of a kind of a science mindset where it's like, all right, if it's true, it needs to be true aside from you saying so or that
Hmm.
person saying so, or wearing a toga or wearing a saffron robe from you know from Asia, like all of the trappings and all of the references to certain teachers or certain cultures or certain times. Like if it was true then, it's for those people when they were alive then, it is true here where we're sitting in this room right now,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, we probably know a lot of things to get collectively as a society that they still hadn't figured out for all that they had figured out. I mean, science being one of them, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I'm much more interested in kind of like carrying the baton forward, right? There's actually a really great quote from Seneca that I should probably read here, but like basically like that's how they saw it even then, was like, we have no monopoly on the truth.
Yeah.
We will take from the ancients what seems to be true, what has the quality of truth and like and works. We will test it for ourselves, but if we find a better way, we're going to use that instead.
Mm.
And we expect the future generations to do the same. Um, so this like I think I've sent to you once that that uh, talk by Alan de Botton about like atheism 2.0, like
Mm.
this, like making the point that we've like I think it's a good thing that society is secularized and it continues to, um, like as much as it has, like it's suddenly much more secular than it ever has been in the past, and it's a
Mm.
very pronounced trend. Um, but we've done it badly, right? Like we've just thrown it like in lieu of like all of the guidance on how to live, all of the
Hmm.
social support, all of the community that like that religions and churches give people. We said like, well, we don't believe in Father, Son, Holy Spirit, resurrection, blah blah blah, all of this sort of like kind of, I would say, nonsense sort of theology. Um, so we're just going to just pitch the whole
Throw
thing
it away. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just
Right.
atomize ourselves into a bunch of lone wolf consumers in a nihilistic capitalist like
When there's thousands of years of wisdom and community and love and amazing, aspects of how it means to be human and how we live in all of these religions, it's like we can't
yes.
throw that away. I mean, that's
And so what are we
madness.
left with? What are we left with?
Yeah.
Either you just kind of like have nothing and just be a consumer in this sort of
Hellscape.
shell of a culture that we have, um, or I don't know, some sort of like atheistic,
Mm.
nihilist scientific view. Like there is like the atheist kind of point of view, or that at least in popular culture, is a sort of like Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, um, like this very they don't offer a lot in the way of like positive. It's more like, well, religion is obviously nonsense. Some sort of really cold and bleak and nihilistic view of science is all that we know to be true. Um, you know, just get used to it and go on your way.
It's a little bleak, yeah.
Yeah, I hope you're smart enough to figure out your life for yourself.
I thought, at least in my mind, there is an irony in atheists in that they actually believe in something. I mean, you have to believe not to believe, right? Like there's almost a religion around atheism, and I'm like,
Well, I
there's
wouldn't call it that. And that's so I'll take like I think they have a very strong epistemology. Like they have their like what they will give credence into, and they have like a strong framework around their ways of deciding what can be known, like they're
I see. Yeah.
what and in that sense you've got to like, I mean, this is classic like freshman philosophy stuff. Like if you don't like ascribe to some sort of epistemology of like how things can be known, then you're just lost, right? Like how can you know anything? Yeah,
rambling around the world.
let's get high and think about how you can't really know anything. Maybe we're dreaming right now. Yeah, maybe we're dreaming right now. Da, da, da. Like, so on some level, you've got to just have a faith, like you've got to hold on to some epistemology as your rock.
I see. Okay.
But that doesn't make it arbitrary either, because like when your epistemology is science, you have the fact that like, well, this works for sending rockets to Mars. They land successfully. We can do brain surgery. There's some reason to believe that there's something to this, right? Like it works in the real world. It's validated by reality in a way that like, so it's not arbitrary, but like, but I hear you. But like, but there, I think that there is like a hidden philosophy that gets snuck in with the science there. And this is a really like, this is something that I think in saying that I want this sort of like scientific knowledge of yourself and the cosmos to be wedded to this. I don't mean, I mean just the facts, right? Like just the knowledge we've gained about ourselves and our bodies and the planet and the universe and the history of it and the whole thing, like all of that is pretty much beyond dispute, right? Like maybe there's some things they haven't figured out yet, but the things that are figured out are like, good luck arguing that.
Yeah.
But there is a philosophy that often gets smuggled in with that, that there's a kind of a scientism, I don't know, like there's a worldview that scientists have that is philosophy. Not all scientists, but lots of them, and these sort of atheistic scientist types, that is a bit nihilistic. And if you think about it, like the strength, why you can't why you don't want to like argue with scientists about like whether your body is made of cells or not, is because there's a ton of evidence. There's an evidentiary sort of like basis for that. But when they say that there's like the universe isn't teleological, right? Like the universe doesn't evolve with some end purpose in mind. What experiment have they done to show that? Right.
That is sort of where I was going with the whole, atheists have to believe in something, is that, like what I like actually is sort of the agnosticism of like, we don't know. Like we honestly don't. We have no idea, and we have no way to prove it. We have no way to prove it either way. We can actually sort of believe whatever, including believing nothing. And that's why I sort of like the aspect of like atheists seem to believe that there is nothing, and I like believing, well, actually we don't know, and we have no way of even approaching it, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we stick with the shrug, rather the shrug emoji than like standing with a fist and saying this is what it is. That strikes me as belief, and I'm like, I'm not down for saying this is the only way.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, and that's part of what I would hope to be part of like the logic part of that the three-legged stool is to say like, I think a modern version of like the logic practice there would be becoming really savvy, a really savvy consumer of scientific knowledge and being able to, so that you can distinguish it from the philosophy that gets smuggled in with it, right?
Mm.
Like it's like, yeah, I think part of why people tend to defer to scientists even about like their nihilistic philosophies sometimes is because they haven't been, they take science wholesale, right?
Mm.
Like what everything that scientists say comes with equal weight, um, or equal weakness, depending on how, you know, cynical you are. Um, and so like, you know, I would want people to be more, it seems like a good epistemology would kind of prepare you and give you the tools to be able to recognize when scientists are speaking from a strong evidentiary basis and like yeah, this is like they did research on this, like this has weight. Um, and when they're kind of like filling in the gaps with like the worldview that serves them for doing their science research, right? Like it makes sense. Anyway, this is a long tangent, but um, yes, all to say that like I think this this view of yourself and and how you're part of the cosmos can be very inspiring, and very, I mean, hate to use the word spiritual, but have a lot of the qualities of a spiritual type experience
Mm.
if you are savvy enough about that scientific knowledge to know what parts you need to like have weight to them and what parts of the interpretation that scientists tend to want to um, recite in public are just their own personal philosophy. Like I'll give you two examples.
Yeah.
Um, one is the you know, I'm sure people have watched like you know, Nova or
Mm.
Cosmos or these
Science
you know,
shows. Yeah.
PBS type documentaries where it's all
Yeah.
about astronomy and the galaxies and the universe and Carl Sagan saying billions and billions
Mm-hmm.
and the point that like scientists seem to often want to make about that, like the profound thing that they get out of that is how very small we are.
Mm.
And it's like I like that's that's an interpretation. That's an impression. That's a humanistic impression that it makes on them. Like just to say that like a size, like the linear size, that like physical size is the important metric. Why
Mm.
is that the important metric? There's another way of looking at the same information and drawing a different conclusion. That you can look at like a universe full of mostly hydrogen and helium and say, holy shit, we are really interesting.
Right. Like we're really interesting. We're complex and in a world of just like very simple compounds.
Just
Yeah.
gases floating, you know, through
Yeah.
the gossip, you know, like just the rarefied reaches of nearly, you know,
Yeah.
absolute zero space for billions of years doing nothing at all.
And full of basically nothing. I mean, they're like just
Nothing,
empty space.
yeah,
You
simple
know?
stuff doing nothing. Like most
Yeah.
of the universe is simple
Simple
stuff doing
stuff
nothing,
doing nothing. Yeah.
right? For vast
Yeah.
stretches of time. And just because it's doing it on a large
Mhm.
physical scale doesn't make it more important or significant.
The
Like,
universe, what did we just say? The universe is a collection of a vast amount of nothing doing almost nothing over
yeah,
a really long time.
yeah, simple stuff doing basically nothing, right?
That's it. Simple stuff, basically doing nothing.
Yeah. And so like you can also look at the
Yeah.
cosmology and say like we are super significant.
Yeah.
We are the like the human brain is the most complex structure in the known universe
Crazy.
by orders of magnitude.
Mm.
Many orders of magnitude, right? So like it's just not even, you're not even being objective to say that like that's the lesson and the impact that it should have on you is to feel your physical smallness.
Yeah.
But it's also ridiculous because like we're also, depends on your point of view, compared to our atoms we're fucking enormous. We're made of trillions of cells and each
Compared
cell,
to a virus would be looking at it as like, whoa, that's huge.
exactly, so that's one example, right, where
Yeah.
scientists kind of like project, like they throw in their interpretations with it and people feel like, oh, that's what I should learn from this. It's
Yeah.
like, well, no, take their fucking interpretations with a grain of salt. Look at what is known and draw your own conclusions, right? Um, that's one. The other one is like biologists. Biologists love to talk about our intelligence and
Yeah.
consciousness
Yeah.
as like uh, just but one of any number of adaptive traits
Yeah.
equivalent to teeth or claws or fur or, you know,
Wings.
green
Yeah.
coloration. It's like it's just an adaptive trait. and in this way basically diminish us to,
Mm.
you know, just one thing among any, one species among many, which I think at a fair reading of, like, if you just look at, no other species are doing what we're doing remotely, like look at what we're doing
Yeah.
as a species. I mean, yeah, sure, people were, oh, we're destroying the planet. Okay, stop pissing on humanity for a second.
Gotcha. Yeah, right.
Like, we do amazing shit all the time.
Right.
um and it's just not even an accurate description. It's not even
Mm.
being impartial to say that, like, our intelligence and even our consciousness is just like one trait among many. That is a useful way of looking at things for doing biology,
Mm.
not for understanding what biology is saying about what we are. Like, it doesn't serve a biologist to get all wrapped up in like how special humanity is, because that leads to kind of bad research, right?
Mm.
And so they're kind of like confusing their starting point with the ending point. Like, they have to start from this perspective of like everything's just an adaptive trait. That's a useful perspective for them.
Yeah.
That's philosophy.
Because that's
Don't.
the mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Awesome. All right. So we've been on this for about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'd suggest is us sort of putting a pin and giving a little bit of a summary as to where we've come in this last hour, and then talk about where we might go next.
Yeah.
So what have we learned? What have we learned?
Well, maybe a way to start that. I've been talking a lot, and forgive me, this is like the dam bursting. I've been thinking about this for months, but like, I would love to hear your impressions of this so far. What are you thinking right now?
Uh, my impressions. I think um, I think I've in my own personal development has been um, probably unknowingly moving very stoic in the last few years, right? Like so, um, because it's that ancient wisdom that's been peppered into like personal development and into all sorts of like manners of being and years of therapy that I was in and so like my tool chest comes from also these sort of different practices, whether it's um soundness of body and how the body works and connecting that my physical body with my mind and my perceptions and my reality, right? Like what the hell's going on, because I can make up my own reality, and then connecting that to my heart, my emotions, and the ability to feel love and to connect with those emotions, and then that spirit, that spiritual aspect of it, so that all the things that make up me, and knowing, just absolutely knowing that the more time that I spend in that mind, body, heart, spirit space of me, the more I can actually bring to relationships, the more I can bring to my job, the more I can bring to my community, and ultimately my legacy of like, hey, I was here and I made a difference, and this was a meaningful experience for me and for others, and that I will exit this earthly plane both contributing and experiencing greatness, and so that's that's what I like I interpret my world at. And um, the things that I actively work on. So like if you were to rewind, just even the last few weeks, last few days, few weeks of like, okay, so what actually do I have agency over? Like what do I have a say in, right? What do I have control over? And I use control loosely. It's like, okay, how do I feel about something and how can I change that and maybe change that perception? So, for example, um, I was very wrapped around the axle by the perception that I was being uh, treated not great by somebody else. My perception was because they weren't doing something, I was, you know, I was mixed up in this world of what did I do wrong, and like why am I not being treated better? And it wasn't until I really worked through it was to really say, hey, one, this is not about me at all. I mean, not about me at all. The world does not revolve around me. Like only my world revolves around me, not the entire world not revolving around me. So it had nothing to do with me. And if I was to approach that same situation with love and compassion, putting it through the lens of somebody else is probably really hurting or really going through something or really um, having a tough time. And if you approach just those basic things with basic compassion, not even like extenuating or not even made up, right? Like it's really just like basic compassion for like another human being of like, man, we all realize that being human can be tough. And when you sort of approach it that way, when I approach it that way, it released all of the energy out of the situation, all of it, because I was like, oh, this isn't about me. And, how can you lend a hand here? And, what is it? And then finally, what is it that I can actually control? And it was, reaching out with compassion and gratitude. It was also, asking what somebody else might want or need, not being a mind reader, actually just like, hey, how can I support you? You know, and then going about what I actually can control in the situation, which is like, look, nothing. If I can't control anything with it, it's like, what am I even doing with it? It's like, what I can do is actually move along. So, these are things that I think are very rooted in sort of a stoic mindset that I've just come about to in different ways of, really spending good quality time with myself so that I can bring more to others, changing my perception so that it doesn't all, revolve around me. That my perception is a reality and it can be anything. The person that cut me off in traffic could be the same person who just is rushing to somebody's to a loved one's side who's in medical emergency. So like I can change my perception as to what reality is. It doesn't that these are the things that are pretty important to me. So that's
Yeah.
what I take. That's
Yeah.
what I get out of this. I mean, how does
Yeah.
that sound?
I mean uh, that makes perfect sense, and I love that. Like, I mean, part, part of what I like about it is that like it can be sort of taken on these different levels, right? Like, there's um, a lot of that has to do with this just sort of these practical, immediate things that people are bound to sort of like gravitate towards over time in their lives because it's sort of the more sensible way of handling things that happen to them, right? And it's immediate in that way. Um, like learning, recognizing these, that someone else, what someone else is going through, and how much, like how much control you have over that situation,
Zero. Yeah.
and a compassion for what someone else is going through. Well, one thing that's interesting, that like something that I still have a hard time swallowing about, the Stoics, some of the things that Stoics advocated for was this real compassion for even people who were behaving really badly. Uh,
I have trouble with that too. Like there's certain monsters in politics that I would say like how could you
exactly.
possibly
Like I have trouble
have
extending that.
compassion for that soul sucking nightmare.
Yes, but so without going quite that far, they
Yeah.
would not go that far to say like all humans like really want, good things, and if they're doing bad things, it's because they're of their own confusion and suffering, and
Mm.
like I that's probably true. I'm not willing to go that far. yet, but on a, on a lesser scale, like recognizing the suffering in other people. Um, and so I like that it has like these different levels where like it can be very kind of like practical psychology type stuff like this,
Hmm.
but it also has all this depth to it. Like if you want to go, if you want to go there, right? And that's one thing I like about this sort of synthesis too, is that like you can just it can just be like your 8 stoic tips for, you know, getting that promotion or whatever. Like like it's perfectly fine to take it at like even that sort of like success tips kind of level, because like that's what part of the content is. Um, or you could get into like a, contemplating whether the a living cosmos, like there's a whole range there, and including mindfulness in it has that sort of like levels also, where a lot of people do like mindfulness meditation almost just as a relaxation thing. Fine,
Hmm.
great, good, relaxing is good. um it also can play into it in terms of like a big thing you get out of doing mindfulness meditation is just like noticing your when you're thinking,
Yeah,
right?
that's. I mean, that's yes. I mean, that is so big for my practice is noticing, my ego, noticing my self talk, noticing, like, and who has my now, like where is it, right?
Yeah.
Like where am I? It's like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
so just
exactly.
recognizing where I am in space, how I'm thinking, where I am, what I want to be doing, how it is, and not having it take up, a lot of mental capacity and taking me out of the moment. It's
Yeah.
actually keeping me in the moment, and that's
Right. And practicing noticing that is indispensable for like there's a lot of things with stoicism that you can't do if you're not even noticing that this is the way you're talking to yourself,
yeah.
right? A lot of this sort of like rumination, like if like you can ruminate all day. If you don't notice that like you're lost in thought ruminating, well,
Hmm. You
you know,
lose the day. Yeah.
then that's it. That's where you're at. You're just like you're lost at sea. Um, and so, mindfulness practice can be taken a little deeper to be this sort of self-awareness of like when you're talking to yourself and what you're saying to yourself. Um, and it can stop there
Hmm.
if someone is so inclined and like has some more, you know, stronger like contemplative sort of ambitions and mystical sort of leanings. Well, they can go the whole route then and like go
Sure.
do sitting retreats for, extended periods and
Hmm.
see how
I've
far they
done
can
that.
push that, right? Yeah, and push it and see like, okay, like you look at Buddhist history and
Yeah.
Buddhist tradition and sort of like, yeah, there's a there, right? Like there's something to be had if you push that far. And so it's like it's like um this sort of progressive disclosure sort of thing, right? It can
Mhm.
be this simple little, tic tac quick fix that you use to sort of like help yourself in your overly busy life, or you can take it a little deeper, or you can take it a
Yeah.
lot deeper,
Hmm.
and all those things are there. Um, I like that aspect to it in several different directions, right? There's like the mindfulness, there's the physics, there's the logic. You can take all these things as far as you want.
Okay, so for our next installment, because this is going to be many, I can already tell this is going to go on.
I know I'm already thinking of the things that we missed, but
I think where would we go? Where should we go next? I feel like we've painted a tableau,
yeah,
of what this is, what is it good for, where what's the state of the state, and I feel like we've talked a lot about it,
yeah.
not what it is. Does that make sense? Like I feel like we've described it,
Hmm.
but it's like, okay, now where's the there? Where's the,
Yeah.
like I feel that's how I'm feeling. Like I want
Like, yeah, like what is the practice? And like that might be a good direction to go next. Is like,
yes.
what is the
Yeah.
practice and what could it be in modern times? And because
I
that's
love that. Yeah.
a thing I'd really like to talk about, because a thing that I think a lot about is like, how might this evolve going forward
Mm.
in modern times? Like, there already is. I'm very encouraged to see how much there is around like stoicism, like books, and there's all kinds of groups and meetups and whatnot, and there's like stoicon, and like there are these like,
Stoicon.
I know, right? um Whatever the name, and like it's a good start, right?
Yeah.
But it is just kind of a start, and it's a little bit like intellectual and occasional. It's not, um and I am very curious to see, like, I'm very interested in like how this could become like, I mean, I want there to be, I'm a little ambitious with this, I'll be honest, because frankly, because I want it for my own life. Maybe part of it is because I have small children who I like have no like I'm not going to raise them Christian because I'm not a Christian, and I think it's worse than nothing. Um, be a little provocative there, but and like, and like the new age sort of thing is
Yeah.
a hodgepodge of
Yeah.
pseudo spiritual nonsense. Um, I'm just going to offend everybody here. Who else can I
Go
offend?
ahead. We'll go for it.
Anyway, like to my viewpoint, there isn't like a good sort of like
Have to have a philosophical grounding for
yeah,
life and life
yeah.
decisions and
Do
life
we not have like a wisdom,
living.
Do we not have like a wisdom tradition to pass on? Like, have we lost
Yeah.
that?
Right.
And we seem to have lost it. Our culture seems to like be like, the unwisdom of our culture is astounding.
So
We seem to put like we put all our chips in with Christianity, and when we realized that we didn't believe like the theology behind that, we were kind of left with nothing, right? We bet the house on we bet the nest egg on Christianity, and lost it. So now we got to like fill in the gap. And so I wonder what a practice could look like going forward.
all right, we will cover practices and the modern practices. I have a I might regret bringing this up. I want to
I've already
know.
offended like half the world's population.
Oh
So
well, this might keep going then. I am curious about um, who are the women in this movement and the people of color in this movement, and how I think sort of like the experience of living in a time of real social revolution, and in a world of institutionalized racism and all of that. So I'm very curious about sort of the Stoic framework and thinking and meaning making through the lens of women and through people of color and through African American experience. So I'm curious about how that where that is as well.
yeah. Um,
It seems like a couple of juicy topics for us.
that is a good topic to get into. I won't try to answer it all right now. Like
Yeah. No, let's let's
there's a lot
let's
right
let's
there.
bring this to a
Yeah,
somebody who's been listening to this for an hour and a half. I think give
yeah,
everybody a breath.
yeah.
And they can deep dive into the playlist and go
So
further. So thank you, my friend. Always a
yeah,
pleasure.
yes,
And everybody, stay tuned. You can reach me at limitless limitl.es, or it's just easier to go to davidcc.com, and that'll forward you to the right direction. Pat, if people want to get in contact with you, or do you want to just completely avoid anybody in like the real world?
I suppose if you wanted to reach me, you could do on Twitter, just at Pat Barry. So it's PatBarry, like the Irish Barry,
Barry.
Patrick
Excellent.
Barry. So Pat Barry.
Perfect.
Yes,
Outstanding. All right. Thank you, my friend.
yes, good stuff.